the PlayStation 4. I've been waiting to do a video on this for so long now, especially since the PlayStation 5 released. I don't know what it is, but there's something about this generation of consoles which resonates so strongly with other people, and I can't believe I'm already doing PlayStation 4 nostalgia. But the console released almost 11 years ago, which seems insane as I remember getting my first Glacier White PlayStation on Christmas back in 2014. And back then, my younger self had no idea the types of memories I'd be making on this console. But that was a very long time ago, and since then we've had so many amazing games throughout the PlayStation 4's generation. From Marvel's Spider-Man to Gran Turismo Sport to games like Horizon Zero Dawn, the PlayStation 4 had unmatched and unrivaled exclusives, especially when compared to Microsoft. And that brings us to the topic of today's video. I want to look at the PlayStation 4 and look at why it was so great. I'll be looking at some of the games it had, the release, pricing, and other things that I think made the console so successful, especially when compared to the PlayStation 5's release, which has been rather flat compared to when the PlayStation 4 released a decade ago. And I think I have my reasons for that, but I'll be getting into all of them in the video. If you're new to the channel, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out massively. I'm only a small creator, so all the interactions help me so much. But with all that being said, let's get into the video and look at the PlayStation 4. Okay, so the way I'm going to be breaking down this video is into three main topics. We're going to start by looking at why the PlayStation 4 was so popular, then we're going to move on to looking at some of the exclusives and great games it had, and then we're going to be finishing off by looking at why the PlayStation 5 is not performing the same, at least when compared to that of the PlayStation 4. This could be up to multiple factors, but we're going to be getting into it all. So starting off with why the PlayStation 4 was so popular. So let's get into this. Okay, so I think the first thing I have to talk about when looking at why the PlayStation 4 was so popular is the pricing. When the PlayStation 4 launched back in 2013, the console cost $399 US, and 7 years later with the PlayStation 5 it cost $499 with the disc drive. There was also an option for digital edition only, which was the same $399 price tag, but that means you're losing the disc tray in the PlayStation, which arguably I think is one of the most important things. So gamers aren't getting that full experience, even though digital games are becoming more of the standard, and I can see it definitely becoming the future and seeing physical games completely wiped out. But as for now, I think having a physical disc tray where you can pop in a physical disc you actually own is so much more important than having an online store. For example, with my original PlayStation 4, I can go to a game store now and pick up any old game, no matter what it be, for a cheap price, pop it in my PlayStation and go ahead and play. And with the PlayStation 5, you just don't have that long-term viability at the same price point as you did years earlier with the PlayStation 4. And this isn't only the cost of the console, we're also looking at the cost of things such as controllers. So a DualShock 4 controller in 2013 was around $60, and now for the PlayStation 5's DualSense it costs around $60, so that's an overall $20 increase on just the controller for the console. But again, it's not just the hardware. Let's look at some of the prices for games. In 2013, the average price for a AAA game for the PlayStation 4 was around $60. So this would be your GTAs, your Spider-Mans, your Horizon Zero Dawns. These were all around $60 when the PlayStation 4 was released. And now, in this generation, we're seeing games get up to around $70, with the average price being around $60. So not a massive jump up, but we are seeing the price of gaming just slowly creep up, which is making it harder for younger kids, which is the predominant player base of video games, to go out and buy these. What it means is parents are having to spend so much more money now, which is just sort of blunting the accessibility of video games for people and becoming way more of a financial burden than a pastime you can enjoy. Now, I'm surprised Sony didn't learn from their successes, because at the launch of the PlayStation 4 it directly benefited from Microsoft's missteps with the Xbox One and its higher price point. From the start, PlayStation 4 was marketed for the players, as opposed to Xbox positioning their console around online policies, bundles, and more spec tech-focused marketing. The PlayStation 4 came across as way more consumer-friendly for the average gamer. However, with the PlayStation 5, they didn't really have this same advantage over Microsoft, especially when they were completely undercut with the Series S, which came out for only $250 or £250, maybe more like $300 if you're in the US. So all of this means that the entry cost, console, one controller, and a game for the PlayStation 5 tends to be higher than the PS4, mainly because of the more expensive console versions, more expensive controllers, and as we are slowly seeing, more expensive games. Okay, so moving on from pricing, but still staying on the same topic of why I think the PlayStation 4 was more popular than the PlayStation 5, I wanted to talk about their circumstances of when they released. Because let's be honest, it wasn't all Sony's fault. So when the PlayStation 4 launched back in 2013, it had the advantage of a smooth rollout, stores were fully stocked, and fans lined up at midnight releases. This excitement was fueled by big in-person events held by Sony and hands-on demos. However, to contrast this, the PlayStation 5's launch in 2020 was heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Global supply chains stopped, which meant consoles were nearly impossible to find, and I feel like this happening at the launch of the console had such a big impact down the line. The pandemic also stripped away the cultural buzz of a console launch. There was no retail crowds, no demo kiosks, no live events to build up hype, and on top of that, economic uncertainty held by some buyers meant that less people were in the market to buy a new expensive console. And this also meant that development delays meant fewer true next-gen exclusive games to showcase the new hardware, and all of this combined made the PlayStation 5's release feel far more muted compared to the explosive momentum the PS4 had back in 2013. And all of this isn't Sony's fault. They couldn't see a global pandemic coming and shortages for hardware, so realistically this cannot be blamed on them directly. But being such a big company, I would have thought, especially in media, that they could have come up with some sort of solution to this. There was the same promotional videos and reveals that was done online and shared on YouTube and platforms such as that, but again, it just wasn't enough to get that hype built up for the PlayStation, and that combined with the super expensive cost and the lack of main first party titles to really sell the console, it just didn't gain mass market appeal, especially in the beginning. Now the PlayStation 5 actually is not doing too bad, but I'm referring more to the launch and the first year of the console's lifespan, where we didn't really hear much from Sony, and even myself, I thought this was strange. I would consider myself a gamer. I'm quite entrenched in the gaming community, and I even remember at the release thinking I was very excited for the next PlayStation, especially considering all the fun I'd had on my PlayStation 4. So when it came out and there just wasn't much of a buzz, I thought it was so strange, and it was one of the reasons that drew me to making this video on the PlayStation 4 and look at it a bit more deeply. And from now doing a bit of research, I can kind of understand, and hopefully you can as well, on why the PlayStation 5's launch was a bit more rocky and didn't have that same excitement as the PlayStation 4. Obviously there is a few other factors such as age. I'm a lot older now and I have a lot more responsibilities, which means I have a lot less time for gaming, so that could also be a factor that plays into why I wasn't as excited or maybe not as drawn to the PlayStation 5's launch with other responsibilities in life. But I would definitely still consider myself to be a gamer. My passion for games and media is what made me start this YouTube channel, so I still love games, but maybe just don't have as much time for them now in my adult life. But let's move on to our next section now and look at the thing I'm most excited for, and that is the games. This is where the PlayStation 4 really shined through, with some of the most amazing exclusives out of any console previously. And I can't wait to get stuck into all of my favorite games and some of the fan favorite games that made the console so popular. So let's get into all of that now. Okay, so starting with one of my favorites from this console generation, and that was Horizon Zero Dawn. So the PlayStation 4 generation wasn't just about refining the franchises we already knew, it was also about taking risks, and one of those boldest risks came from Guerrilla Games, known at the time almost exclusively for the Killzone games, a gritty first-person shooter series. Guerrilla completely reinvented themselves with Horizon Zero Dawn. When it launched in 2017, it instantly stood out, a post-apocalyptic post-apocalyptic world where nature had reclaimed the earth and robotic creatures roamed like futuristic dinosaurs. It was unlike anything else on the market at the time, and at the heart of it was Aloy, a new kind of PlayStation hero for the brand. She was resourceful, curious, and deeply human. She wasn't a sequel or a reboot, it was a brand new IP that helped define the identity of the PlayStation 4's era. On a technical level, Horizon Zero Dawn was a showcase for what the PlayStation 4 could actually do. Vast landscapes, detailed machine designs, and dynamic weather and lighting made the world feel alive, and it was one of those games that made you stop, look around and think this was what the PlayStation 4 was built for, and I feel like that's what the developers at Guerrilla were going for here. Of course, its release came just a few days before another big game, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and many thought it would get buried, but instead Horizon held its ground, carving out a strong identity and proving that Sony's commitment to big story-driven single-player experiences was still unmatched. In hindsight now, Horizon Zero Dawn wasn't just a hit, it was the beginning of a new PlayStation franchise, standing alongside other greats such as Spider-Man, Ghost of Tsushima, and more. It showed how the PlayStation 4's generation gave rise to an entirely new icon that will carry the brand into the future. Okay, so if Horizon Zero Dawn proved that the PlayStation 4 could create new icons, then Spider-Man PS4 showed how the console could reimagine a legend. By 2018, Spider-Man games had a mixed history, some beloved and others very forgettable, but Insomniac Games delivered what fans had been dreaming of for years, the definitive Spider-Man experience. The first time you swung across Manhattan, it was clear this wasn't just another superhero tie-in. The movement was fluid, fast, and addictive, so good that traversal itself became the main reason to keep playing the game. And then came the combat, a blend of Arkham-inspired flow with Spidey's agility, gadgets, and aerial flair, making every flight feel cinematic. But what really set Spider-Man PlayStation 4 apart was its story. It wasn't just about the mask, it was about Peter Parker juggling responsibility, relationships, and sacrifice. The game captured both sides of the character in a way that felt authentic, and the ending cemented it as one of the most emotional superhero games made recently. On the PlayStation 4, Spider-Man became more than just another licensed title. It became a blockbuster exclusive, standing shoulder to shoulder with God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, and for many, this was the moment PlayStation proved that it could handle superheroes just as well and if not better than Hollywood. And looking back, Spider-Man PlayStation 4 wasn't just a highlight of the generation, it was the start of a new flagship franchise that saw sequels being released and new characters such as Miles Morales introduced more deeply in the series. I remember playing this when it first came out around Christmas, and I was hooked to it for about a week straight. I completed the game and got the Platinum Trophy, and honestly I have some of my best memories on the PlayStation 4 with this game. So if you haven't checked it out yet, what are you doing? Check out Spider-Man PlayStation 4. Okay, so moving on to a game a few of you might not be familiar with if you're not into racing games, and that is Gran Turismo Sport. This game showed that the PlayStation 4 generation wasn't just about open worlds and superheroes, it was also about competition, precision, and pushing boundaries in genres PlayStation had always owned. And for racing fans, that meant Gran Turismo Sport. When it was launched in 2017, it wasn't the traditional numbered sequel people expected. Instead, developers Polyphony Digital set out to reinvent the series around online racing and esports, making it one of the most ambitious shifts in the Gran Turismo history. And we've seen this continue even more recently with the new Gran Turismo movie that was released a few years ago, which further developed this idea of esports. At first, this new focus sparked debate. Longtime fans missed the massive car lists and single player content that Gran Turismo was known for. But over time, with consistent updates, Gran Turismo Sport grew into something special, a community-driven racing platform with an unmatched dedication and authenticity. From officially licensed FIA tournaments to meticulously recreated tracks and cars, it became less of a game and more of a competitive racing sim. And visually, Gran Turismo Sport was a showcase for the PlayStation 4's power. Sleek car models, stunning lighting, and photorealistic details that often blurred the line between game and reality. It was one of those titles that really highlighted what 4K and HDR could bring to the console and gaming. Looking back now though, Gran Turismo Sport may not have been the Gran Turismo fans expected, but it showed that the series could evolve in a new era of online play. It carved out its own place in the PlayStation 4's legacy as the generation where PlayStation's flagship racing series embraced the future of competitive gaming and the shift to online focused gameplay. Now, before we close off looking at some of the games, I have a few honourable mentions I'd also like to include, starting with Ghosts of Tsushima, one of the PS4's last big exclusives, and honestly, one of its best. Sucker Punch nailed the atmosphere, beautiful landscapes, smooth sword combat, and the feeling of being dropped right into the samurai movie. It didn't try to reinvent the open world formula, but it perfected it. Simple, stylish, and incredibly satisfying gameplay. Ghost of Tsushima was one of the PS4's greatest games, going out on a high note. Another one worth mentioning is Ratchet & Clank PlayStation 4. It wasn't a huge blockbuster like Spider-Man and God of War, but it showed how much fun the PlayStation 4 could still be. The reboot mixed the best parts of the classic games with modern visuals that looked straight out of a Pixar movie. It reminded everyone that the PlayStation could still deliver light-hearted creative games and not just serious and cinematic ones. Simple, colourful, and just pure fun. Ratchet & Clank was a great reminder of the PlayStation 4's range. I remember pre-ordering this game and playing it all the way through to the end. This, along with No Man's Sky when that released as well at the same time, were some of my favourite memories on the console. And that brings me to my final honourable mention, and that is No Man's Sky. I've got to mention No Man's Sky because, yeah, I was one of the people who pre-ordered it and even bought the collector's edition, which came with the steelbook and a little comic that I used to read so much when I was playing the game to really get deeper into the lore. And you best believe I was very disappointed at the time when I had spent so many months hyping up the game and a lot of money for it all to come crashing down. But, like a lot of fans, I was hyped for that promise of an endless universe, and when it launched, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly what we were sold. It was a rough start, no doubt, but what's crazy is Hello Games turned it all around. They just kept updating year after year until No Man's Sky was actually the game everyone wanted it to be. It went from one of the PS4's biggest disappointments to one of its best comeback stories, and I've got to respect Hello Games for that. Now, there is a few other games I would also like to mention, such as Little Big Planet, Until Dawn, the Uncharted series, and God of War. They're all also amazing games, and actually I also have a retrospective video looking at the Little Big Planet series up on my channel now. So if that was one of your favourite games from the PlayStation, go check those videos out. When we look back at the PlayStation 4, it's easy to forget how much it changed gaming. This wasn't just another console in Sony's lineup, it was a turning point, a comeback story. After the PlayStation 3's rocky start, Sony went back to the drawing board. They listened to players, they simplified their message for the players. It wasn't just a marketing line, it became their whole identity, and the PlayStation 4 delivered on that promise from day one. It was a console built around the games first. No forced motion controls, no gimmicks, no weird multimedia focus like the Xbox One, just gaming. And that's exactly what people wanted when it launched in 2013, with a strong message saying this is about you, the player, and that tone carried through the entire generation. The PS4's lineup spoke for itself. You had Horizon Zero Dawn when Guerrilla Games, the studio that used to make Killzone, stepped out of their comfort zone and created one of the most original worlds of this decade. You had Spider-Man where Insomniac nailed that feeling of being a superhero in a way no other game had before. You had God of War, Ghost of Tsushima, Bloodborne, Uncharted 4, and even smaller surprises like Ratchet & Clank and Until Dawn. I could go on for days. Each one was different, but they all shared something in common. They felt crafted, cared for, and confident. There was a trust between the players and developers that grew throughout the PlayStation 4's lifespan. When you saw only on PlayStation, you knew it meant something. For me personally, that era hit differently. I remember unboxing my Glacier White PS4, that excitement of holding something new that felt like the start of a new chapter in gaming. I remember pre-ordering No Man's Sky and grabbing the collector's edition, full of hype and excitement, endless universes awaiting me. The launch wasn't what anyone expected, but watching Hello Games rebuild it over the years turned it into one of my favourite redemption stories in gaming. The PlayStation 4 was full of moments like that, games that stumbled, adapted, and came back stronger. And of course, Gran Turismo Sport, which wasn't the traditional sequel fans expected, but still managed to redefine what competitive racing looked like on console. Over time, with updates and community support, it became something really special. It's funny looking back now because the PlayStation 4 started at a time when people were saying single player games were dying, that online and live service games were the future, but Sony doubled down on single player stories, the kind that make you feel something, and they ended up defining the generation. Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, The Last of Us, these weren't just games, they were full-blown experiences. And by the end of the generation, we got Ghost of Tsushima. It didn't try to reinvent the formula, it just perfected it. Smooth, stylish, and stunningly beautiful. It was the PS4's going out on top. But beyond the exclusives, there was something about the PlayStation 4's overall vibe. It was the social console. It was when gaming really went mainstream, when streaming and sharing became part of the culture. Screenshots, share buttons, party chats, online communities, it all exploded during this generation. You didn't just play games anymore, you showed people what you were playing. And for a lot of us, that made the PS4 feel like more than a console. It was a place, a digital hangout, a part of daily life. Whether it was the late night sessions on GTA or Fortnite, or hopping online with your friends on Destiny or Rocket League, or just scrolling through captures, it was all part of a bigger experience that the PlayStation 4 delivered. The PS4 was also the generation that bridged the gap between physical and digital. It was where game libraries started to live on your account instead of on a shelf. It was convenient, but it also changed the way we thought about ownership. And now as we move into the PS5's era, that shift is even more apparent. And then there's the other side of it, the cost. It's gone up, definitely, by a lot. Games that used to be $60 are now $70 or more. Consoles are more expensive, accessories aren't cheap, and the digital storefronts can feel like they're squeezing every penny out of you. A perfect example of this is something like the Battle Pass from Fortnite or loot crates from Overwatch. It's harder for people to jump in the way they did when the PS4 launched. There's a growing sense that gaming is becoming a premium hobby now, and that's something both Sony and the industry need to pay attention to, because for all the amazing visuals and high-end tech, what made the PlayStation 4 special wasn't the specs, it was the memories. It was the first time you fought a Thunderjaw in Horizon, the first time you swung through Manhattan as Spider-Man, the first time God of War made you tear up, or when you rode across Tsushima's fields as the wind guided your path. Those moments didn't come from power, they came from creativity. And that's the challenge going forward. As PlayStation looks to the future, it has to hold on to that creativity. Sony's pushing into a new space now. Live service games, streaming, VR, and while that's exciting, I think most of us just hope that they don't lose what made the PlayStation 4 era so special. The focus on story, craft, and giving players worlds they can actually get lost in. The PlayStation 5 is already off to a strong start, but it also feels like the continuation of what the PlayStation 4 built. Many of the biggest PS5 titles, Horizon Forbidden West, Spider-Man 2, God of War Ragnarok, all exist because what the PlayStation 4 did. The PS4 wasn't just a console, it was the foundations for everything PlayStation is doing now. And when I think about the next generation, the kids growing up on the PlayStation 5 or whatever comes next, I kind of envy them because they'll have their own memories, their own late nights discovering new worlds, their own moments of hype and excitement, their own favourite games they'll look back on one day and have the same nostalgia I feel for the PlayStation 4. That's what makes gaming so timeless. Every generation gets its own stories, and the PlayStation 4's story was one of growth, reinvention and creativity. For me, it'll always be the console that reminded me of why I love gaming. It brought back that feeling of excitement, discovery and connection. It wasn't perfect, but it was special. So here's to the PlayStation 4, the console that shaped a decade, redefined Sony, and left a legacy that'll be hard to top. And here's to whatever comes next, because if the PS4 taught us anything, it's that the best memories in gaming are still ahead of us.